I'm Mason Orlando, one of your hosts. Today with me, as always, is the lovely Jess Lee. How are we doing?
Hello, lovelies. I am doing wonderful this chilly evening.
And also the rascally Marcelo Aguilar.
Howdy, y'all. I am also doing good this evening. It's a little bit foggy over here. It's a little spooky in my neck of the woods.
Ooh, foggy and spookier.
I was going to
What we
ask about
need
the
for this
spook.
episode.
Oh, that's right.
It makes sense to me. Don't
Okay, fair
steal
enough.
that from
I
me.
won't. I won't.
Let the fog roll in. Let it be.
Yes. Let it roll in dark and
So,
mysterious.
Marcelo is going to have part two of last week's story about Mexican repatriatism.
Yes.
Did I say it right, Marcelo?
Repatriation. Pretty close. It took me a while to figure out how to get it right.
Repatriation.
Repatriation.
hmm Which
But
again is just a legal way to say mass deportations.
absolutely. That said, um, I'm going to go ahead and put a trigger warning right now. I forgot to say it last time. I'll go ahead and edit one into the beginning of the first episode or the first two episodes, depending how we cut it up. But yes, ladies and gentlemen, this is going to be another tough one. So just a trigger warning if you're sensitive to things like families being torn apart due to racial prejudice. Does that?
You know, human things.
Right. There will be the subject talk about rampant racism and abuse towards other people and children and families and so if that is something that somebody is sensitive to, highly recommend probably skipping this one.
All right. Well, that being said, Marcelo, take us back to where you left us.
All right, guys. Well, thank you again for coming back and listening to part two of our episode of Mexican repatriation. Um, where we are going to be unpacking a little bit more of the history that conveniently has been left behind. So, in our last episode, we were exploring the policies and the circumstances that led to the mass deportations of the Mexican Americans during the Great Depression. We examined how the economic anxieties and the xenophobia and misguided government policies all converged to scapegoat and uproot the families from the only home that they'd known. Today, we're shifting focus to what happened after they crossed the border into Mexico, a place that often felt as foreign as the country that they'd been forced to leave. Today, we're going to be diving into the lives of Mexican Americans who, during the times of the mass deportations, were sent to Mexico, a land that many of them had never known as home. So, we're going to be talking about three different stories, and just that, show different ways that the people who had been sent to Mexico, who had been forcibly deported, how 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 things could have turned out. Our first story is the teacher. So in Los Angeles in 1931, there was a woman named Dolores Mendoza. She was born and raised in Boyle Heights with dreams of becoming a teacher. She was inspired by the vibrant community around her. She often helped her younger siblings with homework and volunteered at the local library, and her deep connection to her neighborhood made the loss of her aspirations even more devastating when her family was uprooted from her neighborhood during one of the sweeps. She was American to her core. She spoke fluent English, excelled in public school, and even had a US birth certificate. But when the Great Depression hit and the government began targeting Mexican American communities and branding them as economic burdens, one day Dolores' family was swept up in a raid, and despite her citizenship, she was accused of being an alien because of her Mexican heritage. Um, Lacking her parents were lacking citizenship, although she was a natural born citizen. Her parents lacked citizenship, so they were being deported on the spot. Dolores faced the choice of having to stay in a country that no longer felt like home or joining her family. So she chose the latter. And then when she and her family arrived in Mexico, where that's where everything started to fall apart for them because there was a promised support from the Mexican government, but when they arrived, they found it to be very lacking and almost non-existent. The family, her family, then struggled to find work while she was in Mexico, and Dolores's dreams of teaching were dashed. Her U.S. qualifications meant nothing in Mexico, so there was no like transfer of anything that you pick up here, any diplomas or any certifications. And unfortunately, her life took a challenging turn after her family's deportation. Despite being born in Los Angeles and having aspirations to become a teacher, she unfortunately had to work as a seamstress to make ends meet, and unable to utilize her U.S. qualifications. And Dolores eventually married and raised a family in Mexico, but she never returned to the United States, holding on to her U.S. birth certificate for the rest of her life as a poignant reminder of her past. And Dolores' story isn't unique. Across the country, families like hers were pushed out of the U.S. and their lives were uprooted by the mass deportation. And many believe that the promises of land and opportunity in Mexico, only to find barren fields and failed settlements. And one man who was deported from Detroit put it pretty bluntly, where he said, "quote, we knew factories, not fields." So that was
Yeah.
the story of Dolores.
Well, I just, I've moved from one city to another, and I've had to it's stressful. It takes a little bit, but to do it without any sort of like plan, just on the spur of a moment, and then just go to Lord knows where,
Yeah,
especially
a place,
that,
another country, a place that
yeah,
you don't maybe that don't necessarily speak the same language.
if you're a mechanic, that's fine. But if you're a mechanic on a farm that already has enough mechanics, there's nothing for you to do. It's just, you're kind of
Right.
burdening other economies, and all that's going to do is, make it so people will need to leave Mexico for more work. It's
Yeah, there was like this like belief like, well, all you need to do is just put people in a place to work and then they'll figure it out, as opposed to like, possibly putting them somewhere where they could actually be helpful. It's like, hey, this person's a doctor, this person's a dentist, this person's, a factory worker. Like they're, yeah. And instead they would just put them in. Which we'll talk about it a little bit more about the settlements and
yeah,
uh, their role in the grand scheme of the failure that led to yeah, Mexico basically just not being able to keep its word of being able to support the people that were going to be coming into the country.
So Marcelo, I was looking at this one picture that you included, and it's very interesting because I recognize some of the words on the sign, but I don't quite understand what it says.
Hmm.
Are you able to explain what it says both in Spanish and English?
Yeah, sure. So we're talking about the little sign on the bottom left there.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so my Spanish is decent. So here, I'll do my best. So it says,
Mm.
se les regresa a México porque entraron ilegalmente a los Estados Unidos. Uh, regresa a México porque Estados Unidos. So it's saying that you are being returned to Mexico because you entered the United States illegally. So that is why you're being sent back. So it's the sign. And then the second part says, el presidente municipal de su propio pueblo puede informarles tocante a un contrato para trabajar legalmente. So it's saying that the municipal president of the town that you're in can provide you a contract to work legally in this state. So I believe this is a sign that is actually in Mexico that is like explaining to the people that are being sent there why you're being sent here, and then what is something you can do to try to get a legal job.
Okay.
Um, so it's like a sign that is like for everyone that is being deported. giving them like an action to do. Um, yeah, so it's a little bleak because like
It is.
some of those people, potentially didn't speak Spanish, so they got sent to another country, and then they have this giant sign in front of them, like you right now, you didn't know what it said, and it's like, what if you just get sent somewhere, and you're like, what is this that I'm looking at, and what am I supposed to do with this? And it's like telling you instructions of what to do next. So it can be very, um, yeah, very off-putting and very like destabilizing.
Right. Yeah. I cannot even imagine what it would be like to have to go through that. And thank you so much for explaining that to us.
No problem. Um, yeah, so like in this example that we just talked about, this was somebody who was an American citizen who, she was a young woman who was trying to become a teacher. Um, and the next story is of the veteran. And this wasn't just these sweeps weren't just like, for families. It was also in this case of World War I veterans. So in this case, this is the story of Manuel Jimenez, Manny for short, who was a World War I veteran from Texas. Manny had fought for the United States and earned a World War I Victory Medal and other service honors for his contributions in Europe. Despite these accolades, he came home to systemic discrimination, but he still believed in the country that he had served, and that belief didn't save him in 1933 when he was caught in a labor sweep targeting Mexican workers in El Paso. Even his discharge papers couldn't protect him. Manny was forcibly deported to Chihuahua, Mexico, a place that he'd never called home. And in Chihuahua, Manny faced a harsh reality. Alone and without resources, he struggled to survive. He wrote letters to the US government pleading for a recognition of his citizenship and his military service, but he did not respond. He did not receive any responses to help him. Unfortunately, his health deteriorated, and by the time he was allowed to re-enter the U.S. under the Bracero program in the 1940s, he was too frail to work, and Manny died in 1945. Unfortunately, he was forgotten by his country that he had once fought to defend. And yeah, that was another example of this. And in Chihuahua, that is the place that like where my family's from, and Chihuahua, even like growing up as a kid, was pretty brutal. Like it's just like mountains. Um, it's beautiful, but it's very sparse. So like to just be sent to a place like that and then expected to, figure it out. Like it's it's nuts.
I've only seen Chihuahua from El Paso, um, but yeah, it does. I've worked with a few people from there, and it's like a lot of northern Mexico. It's kind of,
It's
for
very
lack of better
sparse.
words, the boondocks of
Yeah.
country.
um, so the last person that we're going to learn about here is a slightly more uplifting story. So we're going to learn now about um, the journalist. So now there's a story of Rosita Valdez, who was a teenager from Chicago who had big dreams of becoming a journalist. Her family owned a small grocery store, but like so many others, they were accused of being a burden on the public welfare during the Depression. Like we talked about last episode, where there was some of those people in Detroit who were saying like every um, illegal person is draining our welfare system, even though they didn't have access to it. In this case, in the case of Rosita Valdez, like I said, she was pulled up in a sweep in Detroit, and she was deported to rural Jalisco. Rosita found herself in a world she barely understood, yet she didn't give up. She taught herself Spanish, who, again, she's an American citizen who did not speak Spanish, but when she was in Mexico, she taught herself Spanish and then began submitting articles to local newspapers, eventually becoming an advocate for immigrant rights. She returned to the US years later, writing extensively about the experience of repatriates and highlighting the systemic failures that uprooted families and abandoned them in a foreign land. Her articles brought attention to the social stigma faced by Mexican Americans in Mexico. and the harsh realities of adapting to a country that was ill prepared to receive them. And through her work, she influenced public discussions and became a vital advocate for immigration rights. So that was somebody who, like went through this whole thing and like still managed to find a way to like positively affect the people around her after she went through this experience.
No, and you know me, Marcel. I especially dig stories like that. You know, kind of just
Same.
you know
Hmm.
doing the best you can with your situation. I like that a lot, actually.
Yeah, like there is the thing of like in like in such a bleak situation, like the best you can do is like the best you can do, like you just try your best to get through it and help whoever you can around you. And it sounded like this was one of those, yeah, like this helped her get through it. Yeah, it's really cool to learn about that story. Given that there were so many other ones that were like a little bit less hopeful.
Right.
Right.
um And now we get to the part where we're going to learn a little bit about the rural farms. So now I know these stories that we just heard about paint a little bit of a grim picture, but they are just the beginning of the challenges that didn't end at the border. Repatriates often faced intense prejudice in Mexico. Locals called them pochos, a derogatory term for Mexicans seen as overly Americanized. One man summed it up as, they didn't think of us as Mexicans. We were the Americans who couldn't make it there.
Wow.
This stigma made it nearly
Oh, yeah.
impossible to find work or to integrate into their supposed homeland. And I can tell you right now, that phrase, I used to use it like I would notice that when I don't use it all the time. A couple times I'd use it in front of people, and there was a very distinct reaction to hearing that word. And to me, it never meant anything really. It was just like a weird word. But I would notice the reaction that people in Mexico would like respond to hearing me say that word, which was very interesting because I didn't know that that was like such a loaded phrase.
Right. Just something you would hear maybe your parents saying that you really didn't know the impact of.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, it was interesting. Yeah, it's learning a new slur. It's
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's pretty much what it is.
yeah. um, and so yeah, so then there were the failed agricultural colonies that were set up by the Mexican government. The Mexican government believed that settling repatriates in rural areas would strengthen the agricultural economy and provide a self-sustaining livelihood for these families. However, this assumption ignored the fact that many of the repatriates came from urban areas and did not have any farming experience, leading to widespread struggles and failures of these like agricultural colonies. Like I said, it's all these people who like live in the cities who don't know how to like plant or do anything, and they're just kind of being let loose on these like farmlands, and they're like,
Right.
we don't like, what do we do?
It's kind of like a top-down government solution that really didn't think of a major component of the population they're dealing with. You see it time and time again in like, just urban planning. Nonetheless, these sorts of, kind of gross international projects, I guess you could say.
Hmm. Yeah, and like you know, if like the country was at least like like in a good place and good standing, maybe they could have tried to address these problems. But this was at a time where Mexico was still grappling with the aftermath of the Mexican Revolution. Um, Here I have some images of like a few, like just to kind of give you a sense of like uh, all these images here were taken within 5 years of each other. So like there was a lot of stuff going
Oh, wow.
on.
Those are some really intense photos. I'm not gonna lie, I really enjoy seeing the one in the top right corner with all the women.
There is I will say one thing, like I'm not the biggest fan of guns, but whenever I see a bunch of women in dresses holding rifles, I'm like, I don't care what they're doing, I support them. Like
And the little girls with them as well.
Everybody needs to learn to be a good shot. That's awesome.
Right. I mean, it seems to me this picture was taken to show people, like, we protect ourselves and this is how we're going to do it. And I find a lot of strength in that.
I do
Yeah.
like I do like the city revolutionaries in the top one that are all like wearing like,
The top left.
yeah, that are wearing like bowler hats and like fedoras.
hmm
Yeah, that you guys are definitely from the city.
Yeah. But these are all great photos, though.
Yeah, I was digging around through a couple of Texas archives and a couple other things to try to find all this stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting things that were happening, and like at the time, there was multiple like rebel groups that were fighting for control within the Mexican government. So, like I said, like even if the country was at its best, like it would have been a challenge to help like all these people settle into these lands, but the government was basically trying to put itself back together. Um, yeah, so at the time, the country's economy was in shambles. Various revolutionary factions, including the Zapatistas in the south and the Villistas in the north, had fought for land reforms that were still unfinished. And amidst this chaos, the Cristero War, which we talked about a little bit last episode, um, right here. So these gentlemen were the guys that were the Catholic rebels who decided to set up an armed resistance against the government because of, yeah. Um, so yeah, they were one of the most notable factions of the was the Cristeros. They were a group of Catholic militants who rose up against the government's anti-clerical laws and their secular reforms. The Cristeros posed a significant challenge to the government with their extensive grassroots support amongst rural communities and their use of guerrilla warfare tactics. So their opposition to the anti-clerical laws destabilized the rural regions further and complicated the government's efforts to restore control and stability in the countryside. These revolutionary upheavals left the government ill prepared to support the influx of repatriates, and without proper resources, infrastructure, or even peace in the countryside, the colonies quickly became unsustainable. And the repatriated families, had to abandon these settlements in droves and left to fend for themselves basically in poverty because um, yeah, these farmlands that they were sent out to. And here's some images that I didn't get to before, but images of like some of
Wow.
these like temporary setups that they had of like here, get here, this is the place you're going to be working and the things you're going to be doing. And like in these places, some of them there would be like uh battles happening. And so they were just like, well, we can't be here, so we take off. Um yeah,
So,
so it was yeah, go ahead.
well, no, it just sounds like those guys that were really into Catholicism, being Catholic, I should say. It sounds like they just kind of acted as terrorist group to kind of upset the government to get it to, do their objectives as opposed to, you know, helping people try to come in.
Hmm. Yep. I think you're saying, I think you're picking up on something there, Mace.
Interesting. Yeah, I
Yeah.
just
So
a phenomenon like this in my life. That's all. That's why I'm so taken back by that.
yeah, no, this was something that like I think I may have heard this phrase, the Cristero War, but I never actually knew much more about it. But like, yeah, I didn't realize that there was like a full on like religious uprising, armed resistance against the government at the time, on top of everything else. Because this was I mean, we'll have to double check obviously the history here, but I believe this is around the time when Pancho Villa was active.
Yeah,
So like
no,
all this stuff was all this was all like a big,
Yeah.
this is all happening simultaneously.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah, this definitely has to be around the time that he was active in those communities.
So the American citizens that arrived in this country, like talking about all of these revolutionary groups in the country and the way it was kind of being fought over and put back together. Yeah, all these people that arrived in this country that was ravaged by this revolutionary turmoil and economic instability. these promised opportunities that failed to materialize, and many struggled to adapt to a land that treated them as foreigners. They faced systemic prejudice, limited resources, and cultural barriers that made rebuilding their lives an uphill battle. Yet, their resilience in the face of such adversity sheds light on the enduring strength of displaced communities and forces us to confront the long lasting consequences of policies that are driven by xenophobia and economic scapegoating. I mean, that's for the part of the Mexican repatriation, that's essentially kind of where it lands. We're going to jump a little bit here. We're going to fast forward to 1954. But as far as Mexican repatriation, uh, that is like I said, it was the time frame to there where most of the people basically just got sent down there, and then some managed to make their way back. Um, Before we move forward to the 1950s, any thoughts that you guys want to share about that last little bit?
I mean, yeah, it's just kind of like, one of those things. I mean, I suppose my takeaway is just that I hadn't, being on this side of, being in America, I've only really thought about, the whole moving to Mexico. I never really thought about, what
Being
that
made
would
to
be like
move.
to get there.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
And it's probably just because of where I grew up or my privilege or whatnot. But it's just something I haven't really thought about till you've brought it up just now. And it's just of course of course when they get sent to a new place in Mexico, the people that are there are of course mean to them because that's always that's always the
Yeah.
story of the immigrant,
It's,
right?
it's human nature.
Right. And
Like
any
who are
kind of
you, new person?
right,
Yeah.
and especially if you're somebody that had any kind of Americanization, you immediately have a little bit of privilege on your side as well.
I
Unless
can
you're
speak
born
for
back to Mexico.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak for my experience that like in the times when I would go visit in Mexico, and like I would speak to my family members, my accent was very noticeable. And like they knew I was American. They could just tell.
Right.
Even though I was speaking Spanish, like it was to them and you know, this is just my personal opinion, but like I feel like Mexicans are pretty mean to one another. Like we're pretty mean to just everybody from like a different state. Like we'll make fun of everyone about like the way they talk, the kinds of things that they eat, even if it's like a little bit different, doesn't matter. It's still going to get made fun of.
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I can see how that would be very, very challenging if it's like, if all of a sudden I was just picked up and then placed there and then told like, go pick or go, plant like whatever plants we're planting here, like go to this farm and go work here. And like, like, yeah, that would be, man, that would be hard.
Yeah, right.
I've the poor bastards who tells me that you have to work at a farm. That's going to be a bad day for them as well, just because it's not
Yeah.
going to go good for both of us.
Well, listen here, buddy. I hope you're not expecting high production because that's not what I'm going to give you.
Not really.
Sorry, Mason.
But
Yeah, well,
curious,
he's got good communication ideas.
right?
Um, yeah, so like I said, we're gonna fast forward here and we're gonna jump ahead to 1954. And this is a time where history begins to repeat itself yet again. So Operation Wetback, a campaign with a name that
Oh.
is as racist as its tactics, targeted Mexican immigrants, including U.S. citizens. Raids were conducted using military-style tactics, with families again being torn apart in workplaces and in neighborhood sweeps. Deportees were often crammed into freight trains or buses, enduring harsh conditions without food or water or for extended periods. And one group in Los Angeles was reportedly held on a train for 2 days without sustenance before being sent across to the border. Witnesses described the deportees as packed tightly into freight cars, treated more like cargo than people. This inhumane treatment drew criticism from humanitarian organizations of the time, and though their protests were largely ignored by officials intent on meeting deportation quotas, raids swept through neighborhoods and workplaces, tearing apart families, and deportees were packed into trains and buses, as said, often without food or water, and then sent across the border very, very quickly. Um,
Oh my God.
so this is, like I said, we were talking about the repatriation and how that all happened.
Yeah.
But like that just opened the doors. That set the precedent, and this is something that was used again because we just talked about. To continue, these operations use military-style tactics with Border Patrol agents raiding factories and farms, and it was chaotic and lawless. Historian Kelly Little Hernandez called it, quote, a large-scale violation of people's rights, including the forced deportation of U.S. citizens, end quote. And just like that, and just like in the 1930s, the promised economic relief never came. Instead, communities were left fractured and traumatized. And that was one of the things that like we didn't talk about too much, but um, historically speaking, getting rid of all these people and kicking them all out of the country, it didn't provide the economic boom or whatever that was supposed to happen. It caused problems. It caused, in some cases, agricultural economies to collapse because the people who were being sent away were the labor. They were the ones that were holding those communities up. And so when all those
Right.
people were gone, they still recoup some workers. Like some people were managed to come back, some people managed to dodge the initial sweeps, but like that is the truth of like America is that when it comes to deporting or getting rid of people who are supposedly taking up extra opportunities, really what it is that these are just the people who are actually supporting the economy like behind the scenes. These are the ones that are like really keeping the place going. They're not the ones in charge, but they're the ones that are doing the day-to-day stuff.
Right.
Right. Okay, so I have this is probably going to be a very stupid question.
No such
Um,
thing.
I it just popped up in my mind, and if you don't know the answer, it's no big deal. It was just something that I was just like, huh, I wonder. Um, when they were doing those sweeps, was it affecting other people of like other different communities, such as like Puerto Ricans or Cubans at that time?
So
Or is it
most of
just
these,
specifically Mexican?
I would imagine that there were some people that were swept up that were not necessarily of purely Mexican descent, but most of these took place in the Southwest. So there wasn't a lot of like there wasn't a huge Puerto Rican population or people from like other Latin countries like that. There were some people
Right.
that I'm sure got mixed in, but not a significant amount to where it was uh like
Right. Or
statistically
even just
important.
yeah, or even just like anywhere in of the other South American countries where people could
Right.
mistake them as
I mean,
Mexican
I'm
because
sure,
of
yeah, and I'm sure like in the eyes of a racist like government official, it's like whatever, you're brownish, like go for it, you're Mexican. But
yeah.
like
And you know,
in the set,
you're a tan person and you're speaking
yeah,
Spanish. Yeah.
you're clearly very charming and you have a stunning mustache. You must be Mexican. uh,
Okay,
but
Marcelo.
but yeah, I didn't see in my research, I didn't see specifically the breakdown of what other Latin American countries, but I'm sure that there was some people that got put up with it, but I didn't see anything specifically
Yeah.
that said like what that breakdown was. But yeah, so like there, I think in general, like this mostly just was affecting the majority of it were Mexican Americans, Mexican people of Mexican descent,
Yeah.
given just it being like the Southwest. Yeah, yeah. I don't think that was a dumb question. That was a good
So
question.
I just figured, especially knowing, how wonderful the people are here, and if this offends you, sorry, but not sorry. Um, yeah, it's not an uncommon thing for people of other areas of the world to be mistaken for just one specific, one specific
Hmm.
group or stereotype. And so it would not surprise me at all if there were other people in other areas of the world that, got swept up because they're just like, you fit this profile, so we're taking you too.
No, yeah, of course. And then like in these times when they're like they're just getting rid of everybody, that's a problem. I mean, again, before this, like everything that led to this thing was like the Chinese Exclusion Act. So they were already like getting rid of Chinese people, and then they just added another name to the list, or
Yeah,
another ethnicity to the list. And so I'm sure that they probably just had like non-white as a general rule, you know?
pretty much. Yeah.
Like it's just like I don't think they're gonna get too specific. Like I imagine if they probably found like in a certain town if they saw black people, I'm sure they would probably just be like, well, non-white, like these guys, get rid of everybody as much as you can.
Yeah,
Like and
exactly.
in general, I think it all comes down to again, like these were not policies that were based in like reason or like facts. They were based in like getting like emotional results from like the people who were upset. Like their people who were in charge wanted to make the people that they were looking after feel like they were doing something. And so making getting rid of all the non-white people who they considered problems or they didn't like to see, um, that was doing in some people's eyes a service,
Yeah.
uh,
It's it's the doing something you know you can do even though it doesn't need to be done and it's super shitty, but what
mhm.
needs to be done, you might not be able to do, so you go with the other one
Right.
Yeah,
because
you go with
you're
the
not
easier choice than the hard one. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's easier to tear something down than to build it up.
right. Speaking of building it up, um,
Boom, boom, boom.
let's talk a little bit. This will kind of be their last little part here. But after talking about all this whole subject and these policies and how this affected people, I think it just you know would benefit us just to kind of talk a little bit about what is going on now. Um, so
Right.
by the way, the building was like the
Ah.
Now that's
uh
we've already done this once, right?
so I mean just
Mason.
for those listeners who are just listening and not watching this on our YouTube channel, um Jess, would you mind reading a couple of those headlines that we put up there?
Absolutely. Trump confirms plan to declare national emergency, use military for mass deportations. Tom Homan, President elect Trump's border czar, says deportation plan will start in Chicago. There are an estimated 11 million unauthorized migrants living in the U.S. without legal immigration status. Moving them could cost billions of dollars per year, according to estimates from the American Immigration Council. Plus, mass deportations could have a broader economic impact by resulting in a loss of tax revenue and labor shortages.
So
Shit.
So
so
Tom Homan, what's his name? Tom Homan? Yeah.
Tom
That's
Homan,
Tom
yeah,
Homan,
he's
yeah.
Yeah. He's threatened to arrest the mayor of Denver already, so
Of
that's
course he
yeah,
did.
yeah, and I believe I could be wrong here, but I believe he was one of the guys who was around during the 2008 like push to deport more people. I could be wrong. Come for me in the fucking comments or whatever. But like, um, yeah. So basically, the hardliners. Um, yeah. So I mean, here's the thing. We're seeing echoes of like this history that we just talked about today. Obviously, just given these headlines, these are all very, very recent. These are all within the last couple of weeks. And policies like family separation under the Trump administration's zero tolerance initiative from his first term, um, that tore apart thousands of children from their parents at the border, and it mirrored the devastating impacts of the deportations of the 1930s and the 50s. I mean, you guys, I'm sure, have seen those videos or heard some of those, like some of that audio, which was like hard to listen to. And sorry, Mace, what were you saying?
No, I just said no, no. That's absolutely right. They are hard to listen to.
Yeah,
They are.
They're hard to recall
yeah.
listening. If I'm being honest.
Um, yeah, just a bunch of babies crying for their moms in Spanish.
Yeah, exactly. Throwing spaghetti sauce everywhere.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so like family separations at the border, the mass deportations, and the rhetoric of immigrants as economic burdens, it's all part of the same cycle. And during the Great Depression, the immigrants that were scapegoated for economic reasons. I mean, the same thing happened during the 2008 recession, and now we're watching it play out again. These stories that we learned about today, the stories of Dolores, Manny, and Rosita, they remind us what's at stake. They show us the cost of these policies. And I think and I hope they challenge us to do better, because if we don't learn from our history, we're going to be doomed to keep climbing the same false summits. So,
Absolutely.
Amen.
that guys, this has been, thank you so much for listening to all of this this trigger warning requiring episode. This has been Fall Summits, and remember that history isn't just about where we've been, it's about the journey that we take forward. So guys,
Well said.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Yeah. No,
What a story.
no, I really enjoyed that story. You know, I especially, growing up, where I did, there's a lot of, I don't want to say things we don't talk about, because I went to school and we did talk a lot about these types of things. But, it's always good to, what's the word I'm looking for? It's always good to be reminded of these things, and that it is something that keeps happening, and there are excuses that gets made to, do actions like this, and they never achieve the results that they're trying to get. And it always just ends up doing more harm and causing more money than was ever anticipated, allegedly. It's just, I believe what you said in the early episode, it means to, cover up impotent sorry, political stuff, right?
mhm,
Impotent policy, you know.
yeah, no,
No,
100%.
I think that it was an amazing story that was very well done. Um,
Thank you.
I also think this is an incredibly important story for people to listen to. I definitely am going to plan on trying to get as much attention to this story as possible, so that people have an awareness that, especially with what's going on today, this is not a unique situation. This is not the
No.
first time that this has happened. That, when people are not careful, bad history definitely can and will repeat itself. And that we have choices, to make, to try and make this situation better to the best of our abilities, and hopefully try to learn from our past.
Well, I'm glad that I managed to spin this story around that was very emotional and heavy, and then also bring it back to the truth and the horror of today.
Incredibly emotional, and a very hard story to listen to, but like I said before, a very important one. And thank you
But
so
Well,
much for telling the
I,
story,
I do
Marcelo.
think that
I'm glad it was hard to listen to, because damn, it was hard to learn about.
I cannot even imagine.
yeah, no, we're I didn't think we'd get into things this heavy that quickly into this podcast, but kind of here we are. We will have some lighter episodes to kind of break up the day to day that we're probably all feeling right now. Or,
Yeah.
maybe some of us are happy. I don't know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it just I'm gonna go ahead and say it.
Say it.
Keep climbing.
Until next time, lovelies.
And I don't know about you guys, but after all that, I'm definitely going to take a hike.
We all should.
Fair enough. Hello. And, yeah, like us on the socials. Thanks for hanging out. And until next time,
Thanks,
I
everyone.
fucked up the ending.